Archiving started.
In this presentation, we will be looking at two slides of the respiratory system. The first one is of the trachea. On this view, you can see the trachea on scanning, and if you will look in this area where I've got the arrows, this is where the air will be. So this is the lumen, L-U-M-E-N, so that's the inside of the trachea. All right, then just lining that is the epithelial layer, and you learn in your lecture that the trachea is lined with ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Of course, on this view, you can't see the cilia well, so we'll see that when we get to the higher powers. But you can see the real thick ring of hyaline cartilage. It's not a continuous ring. It's not completely a closed circle of cartilage. It's more of a C-shaped ring, so it's open at the back of the trachea, which is good because the esophagus is just behind the trachea, and the cartilage then won't press into that. But we'll be looking at this also on a higher power. Let's erase those arrows. And now I'm going to move to another slide. This is the same slide. I've just moved the position on the slide. So again, where I'm pointing right now, that would be the epithelial lining of the trachea, and then in the second set of arrows, this would be the hyaline cartilage. Now in this third slide, we can see the same slide. Again, it's on a different view, and I've put it one power higher. So this, instead of scanning, this is on the low power objective, and you can see the cartilage very well. You might remember from AMP1 that hyaline cartilage has lots of little cavities, as all cartilage does. Those cavities are called lacunae, and then inside of the cavities would be the cells, which you'll notice here is just the nuclei of the cells on this lower view. But those cells are called chondrocytes. The matrix of hyaline cartilage is that firm gel-like matrix, but it also has collagenous fibers in it, which don't stain up very distinctly. You can just see them in general. That's the pink lines that tend to just wave around the lacunae. Then if you will look over on the left side, you can see the pseudostratified epithelium. Again, it's not super obvious because we're not on high power yet. In between the epithelium and the cartilage, we see an area that has some other glands. I'm pointing to a gland right there. You can see the duct for that gland, and those are some mucus secreting glands that you see just underneath the epithelial lining. Now, on the next slide, this is of the same magnification, but it's just a different position on the slide. So I don't want you to get used to, say, the epithelium being on the left side or on the right side. It's pretend like you were actually looking through the microscope, which is what you're doing here. But just imagine that you would be moving it around. See if you can locate the cartilage on this slide. Did you pick out this area? All of this is the cartilage. Now, what about the epithelium? Can you see that? This would be the area of the epithelium. Here you can see one of these glands coming up through the epithelium to release the mucus into the lumen, because you've got a lot of mucus that lines the trachea, and that helps to trap any foreign particles that might be in the air that's coming through. Now, on this next slide, here we see it on high power magnification. I noticed when I was looking with this slide that if I focused on the cartilage, as you can see over here on the left. All right, there's the cartilage. You can see the lacunae, which are the cavities, and then the little cells inside the cells are the chondrocytes. But if I focused on that, then the epithelium that you see in the upper right was blurry, and that's because they're at different depths on this particular slide. It wasn't sectioned, so it showed them at the same depth. So then what I did was take my fine adjustment knob and focused a little bit more, and now it was like this one. You can see that the epithelium is much more obvious. You can even see the cilia. See the little cilia right there? Okay. This is that pseudostratified columnar epithelium, but then on the bottom left where the cartilage is, it's not in focus. So I'm going to go back to the slide just before this one. Let's erase the arrows. And this would be as if you were your fine adjustment knob going from one area of depth on the slide to another. So here's the cartilage is in better view, more focused. And then now here's the epithelium is in better view because I've moved that fine adjustment knob, and you can see the cilia there. Okay, if I move to the next slide, this again is on high power, and on this one I've moved to a different area on the slide, and we can see over here at the top left, we can see the epithelium with the cilia. You see the little cilia? And then at the lower right, we can see where the cartilage would be. Okay, that's it on the trachea slide. The next slide I have for you is a slide of a lung. And if you recall, lungs are loaded with the tiny little microscopic air sacs that are called alveoli. You have alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, the alveoli themselves. So those are all different sizes, but for me, we can just say all of these openings, whether they're the big ones or the little ones, most of these openings here are the alveoli or the air sacs. Now you see some other openings besides these, some very distinct ones. For example, let's see. Oh, let me take that away. I didn't mean to move that. So I can draw on here. All right, here we see what I'm circling here is actually a blood vessel. Right here, you see a bronchiole, and then the third, the smallest one that I'm circling, that's another blood vessel. So you might wonder, well, how do you know the difference? I think you can probably tell the most obvious thing is that in this bronchiole, which is the one I'm pointing to right here, notice that the lining of it is thick and wavy. That's how your lab book describes it, as a thick, wavy lining. Whereas on these blood vessels, the lining is much, much smoother. All right, remember that blood vessels are lined with an endothelium whose surface is simple squamous epithelium, so it's going to be very flat there. Whereas the bronchiole is more stratified and has more of the cuboidal. It somewhat goes from the pseudostratified to the cuboidal as you move from a trachea into the bronchiole. But it's going to be much thicker and a little bit wavy. So on these next slides, they're also on scanning. Here we can see just a little bit of a lengthwise section of a blood vessel. Now these are very small blood vessels. That's why they're not thick-walled. These are small arterioles. There's another little arteriole. But what I'm circling in blue is a section of a bronchiole. So it has that thick, wavy lining. This, again, is on scanning. Now, in addition to that, I'm going to put some arrows on the little air sacs. So there you see lots of air sacs. All right. Okay, here's another view of this scanning, and you can see several bronchioles in here. See if you can pick out the bronchioles. I'll put some arrows on bronchioles. There we go. There's little pieces of some. So where you see that thick, wavy lining, those would be the bronchioles. All right, here is on low power. Rather than scanning, we're going up one power to the low power. And I see a couple of bronchioles right there with the arrows. And then with my blue line, oh, that didn't work. Excuse me. Arrows for the bronchioles. I'm sorry. I can't always get these e-board tools working just right. All right, now I'm circling. What do you think that is? Is it an alveolus or is it a blood vessel? When it's got a real uniform-looking circle to it, that will be the blood vessel itself. The alveoli I'll circle that in green. There's an alveolus. There's an alveolus. There's one. And then another, a tiny, this probably a little capillary. That's a little blood capillary. It has a much smoother appearance to it than the alveoli. Okay, here's on the same magnification. I'll put arrows on these. All of these are alveoli. That's mostly what you see is the alveoli. And then, let's say with blue, I'll circle a bronchiole. That's in blue. And then in green, I'll encircle little blood vessels. There's a blood vessel. That's probably a little blood vessel right there. There's another tiny one right there. Okay, these smaller blood vessels, these last two I circled, don't worry about. That larger one, the first one I circled right here. Well, there's my phone going off. Let me turn off my phone just a minute. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here in my office and my cell phone was on. Anyway, you probably heard that, but that's okay. All right, so the one I circled twice, that would be a blood vessel I might ask for a test question. So make sure you can find the bronchiole, the air sacs, and these larger of the blood vessels. Okay, here we have it on a higher power, and what I'm circling in green, that's a blood vessel. You can actually see the red blood cells inside of that. But what I want you to especially see are these air sacs. So there's the air sac, there's one, or the alveoli. I know that the cells that make up their walls look real bumpy and look somewhat cuboidal, but that's simple squamous epithelium. But you can see it's one layer of cells. Some of these cells, the ones that are very bubbly looking, could possibly be some surfactant secreting cells, which are not part of that simple squamous. They're extra cells that are in that layer. But again, you can see it's very, very thin, so it would be real easy for gases to move across those layers. Here is a blood vessel. I'll circle it in. I'll just put an arrow on it. This is a blood vessel. And then to the right, you can see a section of a bronchiole. And notice the real thick lining here where the arrows are, these last arrows are being presented. Okay, now this area, that's just the wall of an alveolus. You can especially see it right down here where I'm putting my arrows right now. You can see it's a real thin layer of squamous cells. All right, now my last slide. The bronchiole is very, very obvious. Here you see it. All this is the bronchiole. See what I mean by a thick, wavy lining? And these are cells that are piled on top of each other. Whereas, if I erase those, here you can see the alveoli. Okay, so the lung slide is actually very easy to recognize. You see the big open alveoli lined with the simple squamous epithelium, and then you see the bronchioles, which are other openings that have a thick, wavy lining. So I've always thought that these two slides were probably some of the easiest ones in A&P2 because they have these distinct tissues that you're looking for. Okay, that's it for these slides.
Archive recording.